Elara did not tremble when she walked into the great hall. She had learned long ago that trembling gave people something to enjoy, and she refused to give them that. The moonbound ceremony had begun, and every alpha, beta, and warrior from 30 packs had gathered inside the stone walls of Blackwood Keep. Candles burned in iron chandeliers above their heads, the floor was black marble, the air smelled of pine and cold wind and old power. She walked through the crowd with her chin level, her shoulders straight, and her heart hammering so hard she could hear it in her own ears. She was 22 years old. She had spent 10 of those years waiting for this night. The scars on the left side of her face began just below her eye and spread down her jaw, curving over her neck and disappearing beneath her collar. They were pale and smooth, like old wax. She had stopped trying to hide them years ago. There was no point. Everyone in the Silvercrest pack knew they were there, and everyone outside the pack heard about them within the first minute of meeting her. She was Elara of Silvercrest, the scarred one, the girl who had run into a burning nursery at 12 years old and pulled 3 pups to safety before the roof came down on her. The story was true, the scars were real, and she had decided before she ever reached adulthood that she would not spend the rest of her life shrinking because of them. The moonbound ceremony happened once a year, when the full moon reached its highest point. It was the one night when the mate bond, the invisible pull that connected soul to soul, would make itself known without question. You would feel it like a hand placed over your heart. You would know. There was no mistaking it, no arguing with it, no pretending it was not there. The moon goddess had designed it that way, her elders told her, because she understood that people needed certainty. Love, left to chance and guessing, could be missed. The bond would not allow that. Elara believed in the bond. She believed in it the way she believed in the sun rising. It was not something she decided to believe. It was simply something she knew. She stood near the far left wall with the other unmated members of Silvercrest, listening to the low hum of voices and watching the doors at the end of the hall. The Alpha King had not yet arrived. He never arrived first. He was Kale Blackwood, 26 years old, ruler of the Northern Territories, and the most powerful alpha alive. She had seen him once at a distance, 3 years ago, during a border summit her alpha had attended. She had stood in the courtyard below and watched him descend the steps of the keep in his dark coat, and even from 40 feet away, he had looked like something carved out of stone and will. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and a stillness about him that made the men around him seem loud by comparison. She had felt nothing that day. The bond required the full moon. Tonight was different. The doors opened, and he walked in. Elara felt it the moment he crossed the threshold. It hit her in the chest like a warm fist, sudden and total and overwhelming. Her breath left her body. The room, which had been loud a second ago, seemed to fall away. Her wolf, the creature that lived beneath her skin and shared her heartbeat, surged forward, with a sound that was not quite a howl and not quite a cry. It was recognition. Pure, bone-deep recognition. She pressed her hand flat against her sternum and told herself to breathe. He was already looking for it. She could see it in the way his eyes moved across the room, steady and controlled, but searching. He had felt it too. Of course he had. The bond went both ways. It always did. His gaze traveled the hall. It passed over faces. It slowed. It found her. For one single moment, Elara held his gaze, and in that moment, she felt everything the bond was capable of offering. Warmth, recognition, the specific and irrational certainty that this person was hers, and she was his, and that some part of the universe had arranged this long before either of them was born. She felt her shoulders drop from around her ears. She felt her wolf go quiet, with something like relief. Then she watched his face change. It was not a slow change. It happened in the span of a breath. His eyes moved from her face to her scars, and the warmth she had glimpsed behind them turned into something cold and flat. His jaw tightened. He looked away from her. He looked back once, as if confirming what he had seen, and then he straightened his spine and walked toward the center of the room. The murmuring started immediately. People had seen the direction of his gaze. They had done the math. Elara stood very still. A woman appeared at Kale's left side. She was stunning in the way that made rooms go quiet. Tall, dark-haired, with perfect skin and a slow smile. Celeste Vane of the Stonecrest pack. She had been rumored to be Kale's chosen companion for months. though chosen companions and true mates were entirely different things. You chose a companion. You did not choose a mate. The moon goddess did that, and she did not ask permission. Kale stopped in the center of the hall, where the ceremonial circle was marked in silver on the black floor. The room went silent. This was the part of the ceremony where the Alpha King acknowledged the bond. It was tradition, older than any law, that a bonded pair stood in the circle together, and the king spoke the words of recognition. He did not move toward Elara. He spoke into the silence of the room, and his voice was deep and even, and carried the particular weight of a man who had never once doubted that what he said would be done. "I am aware of the bond the moon goddess has placed before me tonight," he said. "I do not accept it." The silence that followed was the loudest thing Elara had ever heard. "An Alpha King's queen must be without flaw," he continued. "She must stand beside him as a reflection of his strength. What stands before me tonight does not meet that standard." He did not look at her when he said it. That was almost worse than if he had. Celeste tilted her head and let a small, satisfied smile settle on her lips. Around Elara, she could feel people shifting, pulling back slightly, the way people moved away from something they did not want to be associated with. Someone behind her laughed, low and quick, and then stopped when a friend grabbed their arm. Elara did not move. She did not cry. She did not look at the floor. She looked directly at Cale Blackwood, and when she spoke, her voice was quiet enough that only those nearest to her could hear, but it carried the same steadiness that his had. "The moon goddess does not make mistakes," she said. He finally looked at her then. Something crossed his face that she could not name. It was gone before she could examine it. "She may not," he said, "but I do not have to accept every gift she offers." The ceremony continued around her. Music began again. Conversations restarted, too eager and too loud, the way conversations always restarted when people were trying to pretend they had not witnessed something terrible. Celeste took Cale's arm and led him toward the high table. Several of the visiting alphas watched Elara with expressions ranging from pity to curiosity to something that looked uncomfortably like amusement. She remained where she was for exactly 60 more seconds. She counted them. She needed 60 seconds to make sure her legs would carry her without shaking. Then she walked toward the door. The formal rejection had not been spoken. He had refused the bond, but he had not severed it. The bond still lived in her chest, still pulsed with his nearness, still made her wolf ache in a way that was going to take a long time to get used to. To complete a rejection, both parties had to speak the words. He had not spoken them. She had not spoken them. That meant, technically, impossibly, against every instinct she currently had, the bond was still intact. She reached the courtyard and stopped walking. The night air was cold and sharp. Above her, the full moon hung white and enormous in the sky, completely indifferent to what had just happened inside the hall. She pressed her palm against her chest, against the ache that pulsed there like a second heartbeat, and she made a decision. She would not speak the rejection, not because she was weak, not because she was desperate, not because she could not survive without him. She had survived worse than a man's cruelty, and she had the scars to prove it. She would not speak the rejection because the moon goddess had placed this bond between them, and Elara believed, down to the marrow of her bones, that the moon goddess did not make mistakes. Something had brought them together. She did not know what it was yet, but she was not going to walk away from the answer before she understood the question. She tilted her head back and looked at the moon, and she let the ache settle in her chest like a stone she had chosen to carry. The rain began around midnight. She was still standing there when it started, light at first and then steady, soaking through her dress and plastering her hair to her face. She did not go inside. She stood in the rain with her hand over her heart, and she breathed, and she decided that she was going to fight. Not for him, not for his approval, not because she needed a king, or a crown, or a man who thought her worth was written on her skin. She was going to fight because she was Elara of Silvercrest, and she had run into a burning building at 12 years old, and she was not afraid of heat. Inside the keep, the celebration continued. Music drifted through the stone walls and dissolved in the wet air. Somewhere in that hall, Cale Blackwood was laughing with Celeste Vane and telling himself he had done the right thing. Elara let the rain fall on her face, on her scars, on every part of her that he had looked at and found lacking, and she pressed her palm harder against her chest, and she breathed. She was not finished. Not even close. 3 months passed, and Elara learned the shape of what it meant to fight for something that did not want to be fought for. She was not given quarters in the main wing of Blackwood Keep. She had expected that. She was placed in the east corridor, the older part of the building where the stones were uneven underfoot and the windows did not close properly against the wind. The room was small and cold and had a view of the courtyard's back wall. She made it clean. She put her books on the windowsill. She was not going to apologize for existing in a space she had been assigned. She asked to be placed in the healing wing on her second day, and the head healer, an older woman named Margaret who had sharp eyes and no patience for drama, put her to work without ceremony. Margaret did not ask about the scars. She asked about Elara's knowledge of wound care, plant remedies, and fever management. And when Elara answered every question correctly, Margaret nodded once and handed her a basin of water and told her to start with the overnight patients. The healing wing became the only place in Blackwood Keep where Elara felt like a person rather than a problem. She worked long hours. She learned the names of the warriors who came in after training injuries. She learned which ones were frightened of needles and which ones would rather bleed than admit they were in pain. She mixed remedies by the recipe her grandmother had taught her and a few she had developed herself, and when she ran out of the dried herbs she needed, she went out past the eastern gate in the early mornings and gathered more from the hillside, which was cold and steep and beautiful, and which she grew to love for the simple reason that no one else was there. The bond was always present. It was like a thread pulled tight in the center of her chest. On the days Kale was nearby, it hummed. On the days he rode out to the border, it went quieter, like a sound heard through a wall. She had gotten almost used to it. Almost. She did not seek him out. She was not foolish enough to believe that appearing in front of him repeatedly would change his mind. What she believed, what she had decided that night in the rain, was simpler. She would serve this pack with everything she had. She would do her work well. She would be so clearly and quietly herself that eventually the question of her worth would answer itself without her having to argue it. It was not a perfect plan. It was the only one she had. The remedies were the beginning of something she had not planned. After a particularly brutal training session left 7 men in the healing wing with injuries ranging from broken ribs to a dislocated shoulder, Elara spent the night preparing treatment packets, salves in small clay containers with instructions written on strips of paper folded inside. She made an extra one, without entirely deciding to, and left it on the tray outside the door to the Alpha King's private corridor with no name on it. He did not acknowledge it. She left another 2 weeks later, after a report came through the healing wing that he had taken a blade to the forearm in a border skirmish. She mixed a specific compound for deep cuts that minimized the chance of infection and reduced the healing time. She left it the same way. No name, no note. Just the clay container on the tray. He used it. She knew because Margaret mentioned, with no particular expression, that the king's arm had healed unusually quickly for a cut of that depth, and that whoever had left the remedy had likely saved him a week of recovery. Elara said nothing and went back to her work. Celeste Vane had taken up permanent residence in the keep by the end of the first month. She was not officially Luna. The title had not been given. The ceremony Kale had mentioned the night of the moonbound had not yet happened, and Elara did not know whether that meant anything or not. She told herself it did not matter. She focused on what was in front of her. Celeste had noticed her immediately, and had established, with the particular skill of someone who has had a great deal of practice at it, a quiet campaign to make Elara's daily life as unpleasant as possible, without ever doing anything that could be directly reported. She assigned Elara to serve at the high table during formal dinners, which was not the work of a healer, and which everyone in the room knew was designed to humiliate her. She made comments about Elara's appearance in front of visiting dignitaries, phrased as concern, always phrased as concern, the way a knife is technically just a tool. She made sure that the best healing supplies were slow to reach the east corridor where Elara worked. Elara adapted. She requested supplies through Margaret, who had enough authority to override most of the household decisions. She served at the dinners when she was told to, and did it with such complete composure that she robbed the moment of whatever pleasure Celeste had hoped to get from it. She held her head level, and she poured the wine, and she returned to the healing wing, and she put the whole thing behind her. She was tired. She was not going to pretend otherwise. The constant low-level cruelty cost something, even when she managed it well. There were mornings when she sat on her narrow bed in the east corridor before dawn, and pressed her hands together between her knees, and simply breathed until she felt steady enough to start the day. There were nights when the bond ached with a particular sharpness that made it hard to sleep, and she lay on her back staring at the uneven ceiling and had long, honest conversations with herself about what she was doing and why. She stayed because she believed what she had said the night of the ceremony. She stayed because she was not built for quitting. She stayed because there was a part of her, buried under the tiredness and the anger and the grief, that still felt the bond humming in her chest, and she was not yet ready to call that feeling a lie. Cale Blackwood, for his part, was a man who had built his life on control. He had taken the Alpha title at 19 when his father had died in a border war. He had been fighting since before that, trained from childhood, and he had become very good at deciding what he felt and what he did not. He could walk into a room full of chaos and carry himself as if there were silence around him. He had learned to treat his instincts as information rather than instruction. He felt something, he examined it, and then he decided whether to act on it. The bond was making that process very difficult. He felt it the same way she did. He knew that. He was honest enough with himself to admit that, alone, in private, the night of the moonbound, when he had seen her across the hall and the bond had landed in his chest like a stone dropped into still water, he had felt it fully, for exactly the time it took him to look at her face. And then he had looked at her scars, and something in him had made a decision before his mind had caught up. An Alpha King's queen had to be beyond reproach. She had to be someone that other packs looked at and respected immediately. Someone whose presence made his authority feel larger, not smaller. He had been told this his entire life, by advisors, by elders, by his own father. Appearance mattered. Perception mattered. Weakness could not be afforded. Anything that looked like weakness would be used against him by the other alphas who watched his every move for signs that the Northern Territories could be challenged. He had told himself all of this that night, and he had made the choice, and he had moved forward. But the bond did not respond to logic. The bond did not care what he had decided. It was still there, still present, still pulling at something in the center of him that he could not reason away. His wolf, which had always been cooperative and well-managed, had gone strange since the ceremony. It was quieter than it had been, and the quiet was not the good kind. It was the quiet of something that had been told no and had not decided yet what to do with that. He used the remedies she left because they were good remedies, and it would have been wasteful not to. He told himself that was the only reason. He watched her sometimes, without meaning to. She moved through the keep with a particular kind of stillness that annoyed him, because it should not have been possible for someone in her position to carry that much composure. She served at the dinners when Celeste arranged it, and she did it with an expression of such complete neutrality that Celeste's satisfaction curdled visibly. She worked in the healing wing all day, and went to the hillside in the mornings, and came back with mud on her boots and herbs bundled in her arms, and she looked like someone who had decided exactly who she was and had no intention of negotiating on the matter. He was not going to change his mind. He was certain of that. He was also not sleeping well, and his food had started to taste like nothing in particular, and his wolf was not speaking to him the way it usually did, and he was choosing not to examine any of that too carefully. The turning point in the second month came from a direction he had not anticipated. One of the visiting betas from the southern coast brought his household, which included 3 children under the age of 10. One of the children, a 7-year-old girl named Lucy, developed a rapid and serious fever on the second night of the visit. The keep's senior healer was away, and the situation was serious enough that Margaret sent for Elara at 3 in the morning. Elara worked through the night. Cale learned about it the following morning when he came to the healing wing and found Elara still there, sitting beside Lucy's bed, awake, the fever broken, the child sleeping peacefully with color back in her face. There were dark circles under Elara's eyes, and her hair was pulled back unevenly, and she had a small burn on her forearm from where a heated compress had slipped. She looked up when he appeared in the doorway. She did not look surprised. She did not look hopeful. She looked like someone who had done the job and was waiting for the next one. He opened his mouth and then closed it. He did not know what he had been about to say. He left without saying anything. The child's father thanked him that afternoon for having such a skilled healer in his keep. Cale accepted the thanks and said nothing about whose idea it had been for Elara to be there. 2 weeks later, Celeste arranged a large formal dinner for the alphas of the Eastern Packs, and she placed Elara at the serving position just beside the high table, where Cale would be able to see her clearly for the full length of the evening. It was a deliberately chosen cruelty, and Kale recognized it as such. He sat at the table and watched Elara pour wine for the visiting alphas with the same quiet composure she brought to everything, and he watched one of the Eastern alphas make a comment to his companion, something low and mocking, with a glance in Elara's direction. Elara heard it. He could tell by the slight shift in her expression. She recovered in less than a second, and no one else would have noticed, but he noticed. He said nothing. He looked at his plate. He told himself that it was none of his concern. He had made his decision. The world had order. Things were as they needed to be. Somewhere in his chest, his wolf said nothing, because his wolf had stopped speaking to him 2 weeks ago, and the silence was starting to feel like a verdict. And then, on a night when the autumn wind came hard through the mountain pass and the fires in the keep were burning high, something happened that shifted everything without Kale being able to stop it. Celeste was attending a private dinner with 3 of the visiting alphas. Elara was in the kitchen corridor, returning borrowed utensils to the cook's station. She passed close to the dining room and heard a sound that made her stop. A glass had broken, then silence. She pushed the door open and found Celeste on her feet, swaying, one hand on the table, the other pressed to her throat. The 3 alphas were already rising, alarmed, calling for help. Celeste's face had gone gray. She knocked the overturned goblet away from the table, and Elara saw the particular color of what had spilled. She had seen that color before, twice. Both times had been poisonings. Elara moved without stopping to think. She crossed the room, got hold of Celeste's arm before she could fall, and called over her shoulder for water and the specific dried herbs she needed from the shelf outside Margaret's office. She made Celeste drink the mixture, held her upright when she resisted it, and worked quickly and steadily while the alphas sent runners for Margaret, and the chaos of shouting and footsteps filled the corridor outside. It took the better part of an hour and a great deal of difficulty, but she recovered. Margaret arrived and took over. Elara stepped back and leaned against the wall and breathed. One of the visiting alphas touched her shoulder and said something grateful. She nodded. The next morning, she was called before Kale. She stood in the center of his study, and he stood behind his desk, and the light was gray and cold through the window, and he looked at her for a long moment before he spoke. "You saved her," he said. "Yes," Elara said. He was quiet for another moment. She waited. "Why?" he asked. The question was honest. She could hear that. He genuinely wanted to know. She looked at him directly, the way she always looked at him, and she said, "Because it was the right thing to do. And because whatever she is or is not to you, she did not deserve to die over someone else's plan." He said nothing. She turned to leave. "Elara," he said. She stopped with her hand on the doorframe. He said nothing more for long enough that she turned to look at him again. He was looking at her with an expression she could not fully name, something complicated and pressed down and almost painful. "Thank you," he said. She nodded once. She left. She walked back to the east corridor and sat on the edge of her bed and pressed her hand over her heart, and she felt the bond pulse there, warm and steady and painfully present. She breathed. She was still fighting. But somewhere in the back of her mind, very quietly, a voice she did not yet want to acknowledge asked how long a person could keep fighting for something that kept asking her to prove she was worth fighting for. She pushed the voice away. She was not ready for it. Not yet. The coronation announcement came on a morning that smelled like pine smoke and frost. Elara was on the hillside gathering herbs when one of the younger pack members came running up the slope with muddy boots and breathless excitement, calling out the news before he was even close enough to read her expression. The Alpha King was going to crown Celeste as Luna. The Blood Moon Festival was 6 weeks away. The preparations would begin immediately. Everyone in the keep was already talking about it. Elara thanked him for letting her know. She waited until he had turned and run back down the slope. Then she sat down on the cold ground with her bundle of herbs in her lap and looked out at the mountains and breathed slowly for several minutes. 6 weeks. She had known this was coming. She had always known this was possible. He had never made her any promises. He had rejected the bond in front of hundreds of people, and she had refused the formal severance, and she had stayed, and she had worked, and she had believed. She had believed so hard and for so long that the belief had started to feel like a fact, like something that could not be taken away. She stood up, she went back down the hill. She went to the healing wing, and she worked her full shift, and she did not speak about the announcement to anyone. That evening, Celeste summoned her. The meeting was in the small receiving room on the second floor, the one with the blue curtains and the low table and the uncomfortable chairs that Celeste used for conversations. She wanted to feel private, without actually being private. Two of Celeste's companions were there, sitting in the corner, arranged in such a way that they looked casual, and were not. Celeste was standing by the window when Elara arrived. She turned around slowly, the way she did everything, with the performance of someone who has rehearsed the moment. "I want you to organize the coronation ceremony," Celeste said. Elara looked at her. "The flowers, the candles, the ritual arrangements, all of it," Celeste said. "I understand you're good at working quietly and making things happen without being noticed. This seems like a good use of that skill." Elara understood perfectly what this was. Celeste wanted her to arrange the ceremony that would formally end any remaining question about the bond. She wanted her to do it with her own hands, her own effort, her own time. She wanted her to build the stage for her own defeat and be grateful for the assignment. Elara met her gaze and said, "I'll need a list of your preferences." Celeste's smile widened slightly, the smile of someone who expected resistance and was pleased not to have found it. "I'll have it sent to you tomorrow." Elara left. She spent the walk back to the east corridor, reminding herself of everything she had decided. She was fighting for the bond, not for his attention. She was fighting because she believed in something. She had done good work here. She had saved lives. She had been herself, fully and without apology, in a place that had tried to reduce her, and she had not been reduced. But something was shifting. She could feel it, the way you feel a change in weather before it arrives. Something under the surface of her careful composure was moving. She did not examine it yet. She focused on the work. The list arrived the next morning, long and detailed, and written in Celeste's precise handwriting. Elara read it twice and began making arrangements. She requested flowers from the southern supplier. She organized the candle order. She drafted the placement of the ritual objects in the Great Hall according to the ceremony's traditional design. She did it all with the same quiet efficiency she brought to everything. 2 days into the preparations, she was in the Great Hall measuring the space for the ceremony arch when Kale walked through. He was with 2 of his senior warriors, talking, and he stopped when he saw her. The warriors stepped back. He looked at what she was doing. He looked at her. Something moved across his face. "Celeste asked you to do this," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," Elara said. "And you agreed." "I work for this pack," she said. "I do what I'm asked to do." He was quiet for a moment. She kept her eyes on the measuring cord in her hands, her face calm. "You don't have to do this," he said. She looked up at him then. She looked at him directly, the way she always did, because she had decided years ago that she would not be the kind of person who avoided the eyes of those who had hurt her. "With respect," she said, "you don't get to decide what I have to do, or don't have to do. That choice belongs to me." He opened his mouth. He closed it. She went back to measuring. He left. She kept her hands steady until she heard his footsteps disappear down the corridor. Then she pressed them flat against her thighs for exactly 3 seconds and breathed. The following week was difficult in ways she had not anticipated. The closer the blood moon came, the sharper the bond ached. It was as though the bond understood what was approaching, and was protesting it in the only way it could, through sensation, through the persistent, exhausting pull in her chest, that she could not think away, or breathe away, or work away. She slept poorly. She rose before dawn and went to the hillside, and sat with the cold air on her face, and tried to find the steadiness that usually came to her easily. It was harder to find. She had to go looking for it, instead of simply arriving there. She was in the middle of placing the ceremonial candles along the hall's center aisle, 6 nights before the blood moon, when she heard voices coming from the corridor. She recognized one of them as belonging to an elder, a man named Aldrich who had served the Blackwood family for decades. The other voice was Kale's. She was not trying to listen, she was working, but the hall's acoustics were strange in that section, and voices carried. "The bond will not simply dissolve because you have chosen differently," Aldrich said. "It does not work that way. You know this." "I am aware of how the bond works," Kale said. "Then you know that performing this ceremony, while the bond remains intact, will cause complications. The moon goddess does not negotiate, Kale. She never has. The girl can speak the rejection anytime she chooses. I have not prevented her. And yet she has not, Aldrich said. In 3 months, with every reason in the world to walk away, she has not. That should tell you something. A pause. It tells me she is stubborn, Kale said. It tells me, Aldrich said quietly, that she knows something you do not, or that she believes something you have refused to examine. Their footsteps moved away down the corridor. The voices faded. Elara set down the candle she was holding and stood in the middle of the half-decorated hall and looked at the arch she had built with her own hands and the flowers she had arranged and the circle marked in silver on the black floor, and she felt something inside her go very, very still. Not the good kind of still. The kind of still that came at the end of something. She thought about what she had said to him that day in his study, because it was the right thing to do. She thought about the nights in the east corridor pressing her hands together between her knees until she felt steady. She thought about serving at dinners and gathering herbs and mixing remedies and leaving them without her name. She thought about 3 months of working in a place that did not want her there, for a bond that the other half of it had decided to ignore. She had been fighting. She had been fighting so hard and so quietly and so constantly that she had not stopped to ask herself whether fighting was still the right answer. She picked up the candle, she placed it in its holder, she finished the row. She went back to the east corridor, and she lay on her bed in the dark, and she let herself feel, for the first time, the full weight of what 3 months in this place had cost her. Not what it had cost her reputation or her pride, those she had managed. What it had cost her underneath all of that, the part that got up before dawn because the night was too long, the part that pressed its hand against its chest and breathed because breathing was the only thing available. She was exhausted, not from the work, from the fighting. The question that she had pushed away weeks ago came back, and this time she did not push it. How long does a person keep fighting for something that keeps asking her to prove she is worth fighting for? She did not answer it that night. She was not ready. But she stopped pushing the question away, and that, she understood, was its own kind of beginning. The Blood Moon Festival was 4 nights away, when everything fell apart in a direction she had not expected. One of the elders came to the healing wing, just after midday, and asked Margaret for a private word. Margaret went into the back room with him and came out 15 minutes later with an expression Elara had not seen on her face before. Something between shock and grief and the particular blankness of a person who has just been told something they do not know what to do with. Margaret looked at Elara for a long moment. "The elder asked me to tell you something," she said. "Something the Alpha King apparently does not know, and that the elders have been debating whether to share. They've decided you deserve to know first." Elara put down the mortar she was holding. "The nursery fire," Margaret said. 12 years ago. The one where you got your scars." "I know what happened," Elara said. "Do you know who the pups were? The 3 you carried out?" Elara frowned. "I knew their names at the time. I was 12. I've been away from Silvercrest since I was 17. I don't remember." Margaret was quiet for a moment. "One of them," she said carefully, "was Cale Blackwood's younger sister. A girl named Nora. She was 4 years old. She grew up in the Blackwood household because her mother had family there. The connection to the Blackwood line was not publicly known at the time. Quant. The room was very quiet. "He doesn't know," Elara said. It was not a question. The elders believe he does not. There was a great deal of confusion in the years that followed, and the connection was never formally recorded. They've been holding the information, waiting for the right moment. Aldrich believes the right moment is now. Elara stood in the middle of the healing wing and looked at the wall and thought about a 4-year-old girl with dark hair and the kind of laugh that carries, and she thought about a 12-year-old version of herself who had run into smoke and heat without stopping to measure the cost, and she thought about the scars on her face that had come from that moment, and she thought about a man who had looked at those scars and laughed in front of hundreds of people. She breathed in once. She breathed out. She went back to work. The festival was 3 days away. The ceremony arch was complete. The candles were placed. The flowers were arranged. Everything was ready. She had built it all with her own hands. That night, Celeste held a gathering in the Great Hall for the visiting pack members. It was casual, by Celeste standards, which meant only 40 or 50 people and only one formal toast. Elara was summoned to serve, because of course she was. And she went, and she stood at the side of the room with a tray, and waited for the moments she was needed. She was standing near the wall when Celeste said it. She said it to the Alpha standing beside her, but she said it loudly, with the specific calibration of someone who intends to be heard by one particular person, while maintaining the appearance of private conversation. She has been quite useful, Celeste said. You'd be surprised what people will do when they have nothing else to hold on to. She built the ceremony arch herself, did you know? Right there in the hall. I thought it was a good use of her time. She paused. The desperate ones always work the hardest. It's almost sweet. The Alpha beside her gave a politely amused sound. Elara stood with her tray and looked at the back wall of the hall and felt the thing that had been shifting under the surface of her composure finally break through. Not anger. Something quieter and more final than anger. She looked across the room and found Kale at the far end of the hall. He was looking at her. He had heard it. She could tell by the line of his jaw. He looked away first. Something clicked into place inside Elara, clean and quiet as a door closing. She set the tray down on a nearby table. She straightened her spine. She walked to the center of the room, where the ceremonial circle was still marked in silver on the floor. The room noticed. Conversations dropped. People turned. Celeste turned. Kale turned. Elara stood in the circle and looked at Kale Blackwood across the silent room, and she spoke the words, clearly, steadily, without a single tremor in her voice. I, Elara of Silvercrest, accept your rejection, Alpha King Kale Blackwood. The bond between us is released. The effect was immediate and physical. She felt it in her chest, a sensation like a cord being cut, sharp and brief, and then gone, leaving behind a hollow that felt enormous. Across the room, Kale made a sound she had never heard him make. He put a hand against the table beside him. His face had gone gray. His shoulders dropped in a way that made him look, for one single moment, like someone much younger and much less certain. The room held its breath. Elara removed the pack cuff from her wrist, the silver bracelet that marked her as a member of the Silvercrest pack, which she had worn since she was old enough to receive it. She walked across the silent room and set it on the table in front of him. He looked at the cuff. He looked up at her. She looked at him for the last time with a gaze that was not angry, and was not sad, and was not desperate. It was simply clear. She turned around. She walked across the black marble floor, through the crowd that parted without being asked, and out through the great doors into the night. She did not run. She did not hurry. She walked at the same steady pace she had carried through 3 months of this place, and she did not look back, and nothing in her chest called her back, because there was nothing left there to call. The air outside was cold and smelled of pine and coming snow. She breathed it in and kept walking. Behind her, the great doors of Blackwood Keep stood open, and the light from inside fell across the stone courtyard, and the sound of absolute silence followed her out. She had made her choice. She had made it with the same clarity she brought to everything. She had not left because she was broken. She had left because she was done. The first 3 days after Elara left, Kale told himself it was temporary. Not that she would come back. He did not expect that. He told himself the feeling was temporary. The hollow in his chest, the absence that sat there like a space where a wall used to be, would fade. These things faded. He was an Alpha King. He had resources and purpose, and a keep full of responsibilities that required his full attention. He had Celeste. He had the Blood Moon ceremony in 2 days. He had everything he had chosen. The Blood Moon ceremony did not happen. He postponed it the morning after Elara left, and he stood in the great hall looking at the arch she had built, with her own hands, and the candles she had placed in their exact rows, and the flowers she had arranged, and he made the announcement to Celeste in private, in a tone of voice that did not invite discussion. Celeste discussed it anyway. He let her finish, and then he walked out of the room. His wolf, which had been silent for weeks, had not returned. The silence had a different quality now. Before, when Elara was in the keep and the bond was intact, the silence had been like pressure, like something held down against its will. Now it was just empty. It was the silence of a room after the last person has left, and it occurred to him, standing in that hall, that he had been so focused on controlling his wolf that he had not noticed until now that his wolf had been the part of him telling the truth. He ate, he trained, He met with his warriors and his advisors, and he managed the business of the Northern Territories with the competence that had always come easily to him. He did it all with a gray flatness behind his eyes that he could not argue away. On the fourth day, Aldrich came to him. The old man sat down without being invited, which was something only Aldrich did, and he placed his hands on his knees and looked at Cale for a long moment before he spoke. "There is something you need to know," he said. "Something the elders have held back for too long." Cale looked at him. Aldrich told him about the nursery fire. He told him about the 12-year-old girl who had run into the smoke. He told him about the 3 pups. He told him about a 4-year-old with dark hair who had grown up in the Blackwood household under a name everyone had simply accepted as belonging to a distant relation. He told him about Nora. Cale sat very still for a long time after Aldrich finished speaking. He thought about Nora, who was 16 now, and lived in the far wing, and collected pressed flowers, and had her father's eyes, and had never, in her 16 years, suffered a moment of serious illness, which his mother had always attributed to the moon goddess's particular protection of children who had survived something early. He thought about scars, pale and smooth, like old wax. He thought about what they had cost. He thought about how old she had been when she earned them. He thought about a hall full of people, and his own voice, clear and confident, saying the words he had said. He sat in the chair in his study for a very long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, quieter, like something that had been carried a long way. Where did she go? Aldrich had anticipated the question. He had made inquiries. Elara had passed through the eastern gate on foot before dawn with 1 bag, had declined the offer of a horse from the gate guard, had taken the mountain road heading south and east. She had not said where she was going. Cale sent trackers. The trackers came back with the information 3 days later. She had crossed the mountains on the old Pilgrim Road and had been found collapsed near the border of the Emberfall territory, half frozen and exhausted, 2 days after she left. She had been brought into the Emberfall settlement by a hunting patrol. She was alive and recovering. Emberfall. He knew the name. Rowan Calloway was the alpha of Emberfall, a pack settled deep in the southern valleys. They were not allied with the northern territories in any formal capacity, though there had been no conflict between them. Rowan was known to be a fair leader and a capable one, quieter than most alphas, more scholar than warrior. He also knew the reputation of Emberfall. It was the pack where scars were considered marks of honor, where the healers were among the most skilled in all the territories, where pack members were chosen by skill and character rather than by lineage. Of course she had gone there. Of course she was already becoming exactly herself, in a place that would recognize exactly what she was. He requested a formal meeting with Rowan Calloway through the standard diplomatic channels. He was told the Alpha was willing to receive him. He spent the following weeks managing what Celeste's absence had revealed. Because Celeste left. She left 12 days after the postponed ceremony, with considerably less composure than she had arrived with. And in the process of leaving, certain things became apparent that had not been apparent before. Letters were found. Correspondence with a rival pack to the east, the Greystone faction, that had been Cale's primary political opponent for 3 years. The correspondence was detailed and specific, and went back considerably further than 12 days. Celeste had been feeding information about the Northern Territory's military positioning to Greystone for at least 8 months. She had also, the investigation revealed, arranged the poisoning attempt at the dinner where Elara had saved her life. The irony was not lost on him. He sat with it for several days, and he let it be as heavy as it was, because he had earned the weight of it. Elara had saved the life of the woman who had poisoned her food supply, slowed the delivery of her healing materials, mocked her in front of visiting packs, and arranged for her to build the arch for her own defeat. She had saved her anyway, because it was the right thing to do. And then she had been blamed for being near the cup. He had said nothing. He had sat at his table and looked at his plate. He thought about that a great deal. He asked Margaret about Elara's time in the healing wing, not a formal inquiry. He sat in the room where she had worked and talked to Margaret quietly, and Margaret told him about the little girl with the fever who had recovered when no one else could have managed it, and the 7 men after the brutal training session, and the specific remedies she had developed herself, and the mornings she had gone to the hillside alone, and the long hours, and the way she had done all of it without once asking for recognition. He had watched her pour wine at formal dinners and looked at his plate. He had 2 months to sit with all of this before he was ready to make the journey to Emberfall. He could have gone sooner. He chose not to. He was not going to appear at her door, still ragged with realization. If he was going to go, he was going to go, having understood fully what he had done and who he had done it to. He understood. He went. The mountain road in winter was long and cold and demanding. He went with 2 guards, which was far fewer than his advisors recommended, and he spent most of the journey on horseback in silence, watching the landscape change from the dark pines of the north to the open valleys of the south, where the snow lay softer and the light was different. Emberfall was nothing like Blackwood Keep. It was built into the hillside, sprawling and low, with wide covered walkways between the buildings and enormous windows that faced south to catch the light. There were gardens, even in winter. Herb gardens, he noticed, with careful labels on small wooden stakes, the kind of meticulous attention that spoke of someone who thought about long-term growth. He wondered if they were hers. He suspected they were. Rowan Calloway received him in the main hall. He was a tall man, lean and angular, with light brown hair going gray at the temples, and steady gray eyes that took in information without immediately broadcasting what it meant. He shook Cale's hand without ceremony and offered him a seat and food and warm tea after the journey. They talked for an hour about neutral things, territory boundaries and trade routes, and the seasonal conditions on the mountain roads. Cale was aware that this was Rowan's way of taking his measure. He did not mind. He sat still and answered the questions honestly and waited. Eventually, Rowan said, "She's well, in case that's the first thing you want to know and aren't sure how to ask." Cale looked at him. "She's been here 3 months," Rowan said. "She's the best healer we've had in 20 years. The whole valley knows her name now." He paused. "She hasn't mentioned you. I think it took effort. The first weeks. Now I think it's something else. I think you've become someone she used to know." The words landed as precisely as they were intended to. "I need to speak with her," Cale said. "I know," Rowan said. "She knows you're here. She's been told. She hasn't decided yet whether she wants to speak with you. I told her the choice was entirely hers." He looked at Cale directly. "That's how we do things here." Cale nodded. "That's how it should be done." They sat with that for a moment. "She'll come to dinner," Rowan said finally. "She always does. Whatever she decides, she won't hide from it. That's not who she is." Cale knew that. He had always known that. He just hadn't understood, for a long time, what it meant. The dining hall at Emberfall was long and lit by low, warm light, and it was full when Cale arrived that evening. He sat at Rowan's right, which was the formal guest position, and he watched the room settle into its routine with the particular ease of a community that was comfortable with itself. He saw her before she saw him. She came in from the far side of the hall, talking to a woman beside her, her head tilted slightly in that way she had when she was listening carefully to something. She was wearing a healer's gray, clean and simple, with her hair loose and her scars completely uncovered. She looked nothing like the careful, composed, slightly too still version of herself that he had watched for 3 months in Blackwood Keep. She looked like someone who had set a heavy thing down and walked away from where it had been. She looked like herself. She saw him. Something crossed her face. He had expected a great deal and prepared himself for a great deal. He had prepared for anger. He had prepared for tears. He had prepared for coldness. He had not prepared for what he actually saw, which was a very brief, very honest flash of something like tiredness, and then nothing. Not coldness, not anger, not pain. Just a woman who had moved on, looking at someone she used to know. She sat down across the table, 3 seats away, with her back straight and her hands folded in her lap. He waited until the meal had progressed to its midpoint. Then he asked if they could speak privately. She considered it for long enough that he was not certain she would agree. Then she nodded once and rose, and he followed her out to the covered walkway that ran along the southern side of the building, where the cold air smelled of pine and dried herbs, and the valley below was full of darkness and quiet stars. She stood with her arms crossed, not defensively, more like someone settling into a position, and she looked at him with that same clear, unreadable expression. He did not begin with excuses. He had decided, on the mountain road, that there were no excuses worth giving, only truths worth saying. "I know about the fire," he said. I know about Nora. Something moved behind her eyes. Just briefly. That's not why I'm here, he said quickly. I don't want you to think that's why. That's not something that changes what I did. It's just something I needed you to know that I know. She said nothing. He kept going. I stood in front of hundreds of people and used your appearance to justify my own fear. Because that's what it was. I was afraid of what the other alphas would say about a king who had a scarred mate. I was afraid of looking weak. And I took that fear and I said it out loud and I let everyone in that room see it, and what I was really showing them was not your weakness, it was mine. He looked at her. I've thought about that every day for 2 months. I'll probably think about it every day for the rest of my life. The walkway was quiet. Below them, a lamp moved in the valley. Someone walking between buildings. You saved Celeste's life, he said. The woman who made every day in that keep harder than it needed to be. You saved her life because it was the right thing to do, and then you were blamed for it, and I sat at that table and I said nothing. He stopped. I'm not going to ask you to forgive me. I don't think I've earned the right to ask for that yet. I just needed to say those things to your face, because you deserve to have them said to your face. She looked at him for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was even and unhurried and completely steady. I believed in the bond, she said. For 3 months, I got up every morning in that cold corridor, and I went to work, and I left remedies outside your door, and I built the arch for your coronation ceremony, with my own hands, and I did all of it, because I believed the bond meant something worth fighting for. She paused. I was not wrong to believe that. I want you to know that. I was not wrong. The bond was real. What I felt was real. She uncrossed her arms. She looked at him directly. But here is what I learned, she said. You cannot fight for something that is only fighting back. I spent 3 months proving I was worth something, to a person who had decided I wasn't, and every day I stayed was another day I was choosing their version of me over my own. I stopped, not because I gave up, because I finally understood that fighting for a person who won't fight for you is not love, it's punishment. And I had done nothing to deserve punishment. He stood with that. You came here, she said. You're here now, and you're saying the right things, and I believe that you mean them. She tilted her head slightly. But I'm not the person who was standing in that hall 3 months ago. That person was still looking at you hoping to be seen. I'm not looking at you that way anymore. I don't need you to see me. I know who I am. He had come prepared for a great deal. He was not prepared for how much this hurt. Elara, he said. I'm not angry at you, she said. I want you to know that I was angry earlier. Now I mostly feel sorry. Not for myself. For you. She looked at him with something that was honest and not unkind. You had something the moon goddess herself arranged, and you threw it away because you were worried about what people would think. You're going to have to live with that. That's yours to carry. I don't carry it anymore. She stepped back from the wall. I hope you find whatever you're looking for, she said. I genuinely do, but I'm not it. I was, maybe, once. You made a different choice. I've made mine. She turned and walked back toward the warm light of the dining hall. He watched her go. She did not look back. Not once. He stood on the cold walkway for a long time after she disappeared inside. The valley below was dark and still. His chest ached with something that had no name he wanted to give it. Something that felt like the word too late made into a feeling. He had thought, somewhere in the back of his mind, that he could fix this. That coming here, saying the right things, was the shape of fixing it. He understood now, standing in the dark, that some things cannot be fixed, only carried. He had broken something that could not be repaired, and she had not broken with it. She had simply walked out from the wreckage and kept going. That was who she was. That had always been who she was. He had looked at her scars and seen damage, and she had looked at them and seen everything she had survived. He had seen weakness, and she had been standing in front of him, the most whole and unbreakable person he had ever met. He returned to the main hall. He thanked Rowan Calloway for his hospitality. He made arrangements for the night and the morning ride back to the mountain road. He was courteous and controlled, and entirely present for every conversation that was required of him. And somewhere behind his eyes, in the place where certainty used to live, there was only the memory of her walking away from him through warm light, with her back straight and her scars uncovered, and not a single glance cast backward. Not because she was cold, because she was done. He rode home the next morning through the mountain pass in winter light, and the cold was sharp and clear, and he let it be as cold as it was, and he did not pretend it was anything other than what it was. He had been given something extraordinary. He had refused it out of pride. He had spent months watching it hold itself together, with quiet, steady grace, in the middle of everything he and Celeste had put it through. And then, when he had finally pushed it to the very last edge of what any person could be asked to endure, he had watched it speak its own release, in a clear voice, in front of a room full of witnesses, set a bracelet on a table, and walk out into the dark. He had sent men to track her progress across the mountains and had not once thought to stop her. He understood now what he should have done. He understood it the way you understand things that come to you after the moment has passed, with clarity and with nowhere to put it. She had said she was not angry. He believed her. Anger at least meant continued investment. What she had shown him on that walkway was something far more final. She had looked at him the way you look at a stranger, politely, without need, without hope. She had been completely free of him, and she had earned that freedom the hard way, and it was hers, and no part of it belonged to him anymore. The Northern Territories came into view at the end of the second day of riding. Dark pines and cold stone, and the long walls of Blackwood Keep, outlined against a gray sky. His home, his responsibility, his inheritance and his burden and his choice. He rode through the gates and dismounted, and handed his horse to the stable hand, and walked into the keep, and the stone halls were exactly as he had left them, and everything was familiar, and nothing felt the way it used to. He went to Nora's room. She was sitting by the window with a book, the way she usually was in the evenings. She looked up when he came in, and raised her eyebrows at him with the particular expression she reserved for moments when she thought he was being strange. He sat down across from her and looked at her for a moment. "Do you know someone named Elara?" he asked. Nora looked at him. "The name doesn't ring a bell. Why?" "She saved your life," he said, "when you were 4, in the fire." Nora went still. She knew about the fire. Their mother had told her. She had always been told that the details of who had helped were uncertain. "She was 12 years old," he said. "She has scars." Nora looked at him for a long, steady moment. She was 16, and she had never once in her life been easy to fool. "And what did you do?" she asked quietly. He told her, all of it. He sat in the chair across from his 16-year-old sister and told her everything, because she deserved the truth, and because saying it out loud to another person was part of the work he needed to do. When he finished, Nora was quiet for a while. "Is she all right?" she asked finally. "This person who saved my life." "Yes," he said. "She's more than all right. She's exactly herself, somewhere where people can see that clearly." Nora looked at her book. She looked back at him. "Good," she said. "That's what matters." He nodded. "She deserved better than what I gave her," he said. "Yes," Nora said simply. "She did." He sat with that for a moment. Then he nodded again, stood up, and went back to the work of being the man who ran the Northern Territories, because that was the work that was still his, and doing it well was the only thing left that he could offer to a world that had tried to teach him something, and had, finally, succeeded. He did not send another message to Emberfall. He did not search for her again. He let her go, completely and deliberately, and too late, the way you set down something precious after you have already broken it. And in the Emberfall Valley, in the long, low building with the wide windows and the well-labeled herb gardens, Elara of Silvercrest rose with the sun, the way she always did, and went to the workbench and began preparing the morning's remedies. She moved through her work with the steadiness that came from knowing exactly who she was. She went to the garden to check on the winter plantings. She talked with the morning patrol when they came in for a check. She laughed at something one of them said, and the sound of it was easy and real and entirely her own. She pressed her hand to her chest, out of habit, where the bond used to be. There was no ache there. There was just her own heartbeat, steady and sufficient, carrying her through a morning that was cold and bright and entirely hers. She breathed it in. She kept moving. Some people spend their whole lives waiting to be seen by the one person who is looking right at them. Some spend their whole lives teaching others how to look properly, how to set down what they think beauty should mean, long enough to see what it actually is. And some The ones who carry the oldest kind of courage simply stop waiting. They look at themselves with clear eyes, they see something worth keeping, and they walk forward with that knowledge like a light that nobody else's blindness can put out. Elara had walked away, not because she had given up, because she had finally, completely, chosen herself, and the choosing had made her free.